we're typically going to find two refrigerants that we're going to encounter. You know, I like to push the envelope, explore the limitations of what you may find, so you will know what the limitations are. You will know where the envelope ends, because having that sense is what gives you confidence. Because when it comes time to questioning what's going on or somewhere in troubleshoot, you know your basics, and you know that these don't change. So we're going to start with the R22, and we're going to touch on what we covered yesterday. When we're talking about R22, we're going to go straight for operating pressures. We learned that typical operating pressures for R22 is 75 psig over about 195 psig. We learned yesterday that when R22 begins to freeze up, it's because gauge pressure has fallen below 50 psig. And when we're 50 psig on the low side, that's when we begin to freeze up and we begin to make ice. So let's talk about R22 just for a bit. And just really going over pressures, not so much facts about it. So when we're looking at R22, we have to notice that we have our ranges. 75 psig is a very excellent range for R22. 50 psig is when it's dropped below and freezing will commence. So why though? Why is it that it's 50? Is this a magical number? Is this 50 number just a number that I like? No. It has to do with temperature pressure charts. Temperature pressure charts are very relevant in our trade because it's how we accurately introduce refrigerant into a system. It's very easy to miss, to put too much or not enough refrigerant, especially when we're talking about R410A, the refrigerant that's sold today, the refrigerant that was sold yesterday, the one that's going to be on sale tomorrow, 410A. Those of us in the sales path, if you're into sales, you will land lots of maintenance calls. And these maintenances you're running are previous customers that have a new system that your company installed, that have 410A. So if you're performing maintenance on a 410A system, you need to understand properties, because at this point, you're trying to find performance in a machine that's already cooled. And it is possible, but you cannot do it without superheat and subcool. This is not electron superheat and subcool. This is just a very light lecture on our refrigerant gauges and our basic numbers. That is it. Let's start. What we need to understand is that when we're talking R22 that has a running pressure of about 75 psig, we see that when we drop to 50 psig, we induce freezing. But why? And it's all about temperature pressure charts. Many times you'll hear, get your temperature pressure chart out. You'll need your temperature pressure chart. When we need our temperature pressure chart is when we are charging the system to subcool or superheat. Without temperature pressure charts, we can never calculate what our superheat and subcool are. Superheat and subcool is the ultimate in performance. It is the way that we properly put refrigerant into new systems, into systems that carry 410A. To understand this, we have to understand what was different. about our predecessor, R22. We discussed R22 has a low range of 50, high range of 75. The highest I've ever put an R22 unit myself was probably about 81, and this was chasing superheat. I wasn't just charging off gauge pressure. We don't charge off gauge pressure. We charge off superheat. What we need to notice is that when you look at your refrigerant gauges, it's very tempting to look at your PSIG. It's very tempting just to use your low side gauge. As I said earlier, low side gauge can be used to check if a system is barren of refrigerant, which when we looked at our troubleshooting path 2 lectures ago, remember we had our house that had the hot air, so we went directly to the condenser, and at the condenser we had our list, and we discovered that our refrigerant gauges were the only item on the list that could be used without taking off the panel. Well, in a case like that, we're simply trying to see if the machine's empty. We're not trying to tune it, we're not trying to balance it. We're not even trying to see if it has refrigerant, or if it's running low. We're just trying to see if there's refrigerant in it at all. So in a case where the system's off, it's acceptable to just plug in your low side. Once you turn on the system, once the system is on, your high side needs to go on. Because now we need to see what's happening in both sides of the refrigeration cycle. So why do we freeze at 50? Why will you always freeze at 50? Because it is temperature pressure charts. And instead of looking one up, every time you look at your gauges, there's a temperature pressure chart looking at you, waiting for you. It's a lot easier to confirm superheat and subcool when you already have one of your temperatures right in front of your face. When we have our refrigerant gauges, we have gauge pressure on the outside, PSIG, and then in the bars, in our pink bar is our temperature. In our green bar is our temperature for the specific refrigerant. Meaning, let's look at this. When I'm R22, about 75 PSIG, follow my needle down. Where do I land in my green bar? I'm slightly above 40. I'm about 41, 42 degrees when I'm at 75 PSIG for R22. Watch my green bar now as I slide down towards 50. Where am I in temperature? 32, 30 degrees. This is why once PSIG drops below 50, we're not guessing it's going to freeze up. We don't think it's going to freeze up. We are predicting and anticipating it is going to freeze up because it is below 30 on the temperature pressure chart. These are not just refrigerant gauges. These are temperature pressure charts, both of them. This is drawn to scale. It took me like 4 minutes to draw all the scale yesterday. It's the scale. So when I hold my needle at 50, if you look at your gauges, you will find a similar orientation. Look at your green bar. Look at your green bar when your PSIG is 50. Look at your outer line. And imagine your needle is sitting at that 50, and then follow the needle back. Where do you land on that green line? You land there? 32, 30. You see it? Right at 50 PSIG. We follow back. Like there's 50, and then look at the green bar. Like look at the green bar. You see how, look at your temperature of the green bar, you can see it's like 20, 30, 40. That's freezing. If you imitate up at 75, now look at your green bars. 42, 42, that's where we want it, 42 degrees. That's typical, the temperature we want at our evaporator is 42 degrees. Once you find that you can follow your needle and have an instant temperature, your superheat subcooling process just got half easier. So let's look here. Let's go with 410A. We're sitting here at 25, cruising. Can anyone tell me a similarity in the temperature between 125 cruising and the temperature when R22 is cruising, 42 degrees in the green bar, and then follow up in the pink bar to 42 degrees. Where do we wind up on PSIG? About 125 at 42 degrees. From now on with gauge pressure, we search gauge pressure just when we want to confirm venting. In the case that we are chasing the leak, any other time you pick up your refrigerant gauges, we're not looking for gauge pressure. We're looking for temperature. Wherever your needle is, your accuracy is in the bars, in the pink. This is the number you see. Whatever is in the pink, we need to know our limitations so you never get to chase in the pink and just see the pink here. Realize 410A, we better not be below 100. But once we're above 100, and then our upper threshold on 410A is about 160. It's about the highest I've gotten one. And that was not for funsies, that was chasing superheat. This is what we need to find out today. This is what I slowly want to explore. Just as you feel more comfortable with your multimeters, let's start to feel comfort in our gauges. Because our gauges are very powerful, extremely powerful. But if we don't know certain protocols with the gauges, we lose out. We miss out on what they provide for us, which again is accuracy, 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 accuracy. That's what keeps you well to do and gainfully employed. That's what keeps you busy. That's what keeps you respected. Wherever you work, when your accuracy is up, when they know, when the owners know that, when they send you out, that there's very, very little callbacks. That's a man you cannot get rid of. That's a man that, if you're working for a good company will find a man like that and they will give that man incentive to stay. Lower tier companies don't think like that. So let's watch what happens when we finally use now our bars to find pressure. We see now 32 degrees at 100 PSIG. It's not a mystery. This is why we can anticipate and predict that if we leave a 410A machine sitting below 100, sitting below 32, it's not, it might freeze up. It's not, I think it's going to freeze up. It's not hot today. It shouldn't freeze up. It is going to freeze up. When I say predict what an air conditioner is going to do, you cannot leave pressures this low. Or if you are right at the threshold, you have to explain it to the homeowner, show them. And if they still refuse, make a disclaimer. Explain to homeowner, refrigerant is at 103 PSIG. Explain to homeowner once drops to 50 PSIG, 32 degrees is the corresponding temperature. Unit will begin to replace it. Recommend cleaning coil. Recommend adding refrigerant. Customer says no, initials. When she calls back, when they call back with some sort of brief, you have those disclaimers. And if you put them in like clockwork, every single invoice proposal, those are things that make you incredibly valuable. So now we see that we chase the bar. And why do we need it? Let's look back to our original. R22, range, 75, 50. Very small range. Look at the range here, 100 to 160. Look at this range. Look at that pink bar range. It extends over here. You can't see it too well, but the range comes all the way back here. That is a lot. Compared to our R22, the range is big. Now, what this means, when we have a range this large, that means that when we're called to a job or we're dispatching, our complaint is it's not cooling very well. Not that it's not, the house is not hot, but it's just not cooling very well. Well, you need to find what's going on, and then you need to offer a repair, but when you offer that repair, you have to already have looked at that repair and decide, will this repair really have an impact? Before I even tell this person about this option, will this help? Am I just going to collect money for saying something that's going to help because I have to do something? Or will what I'm going to do is help? Because if it's not, that money that you're going to ask for, take it somewhere else. Hot rooms, duct modification, every house needs. So if we're 125, we know our sweet spot for R22 is 75. Where is the sweet spot in here? There is a sweet spot in here, typically above 125, somewhere before 160. You won't find that sweet spot without superheating subcool. When we come up to 125, there's a lot of room for improvement. But to find this improvement, it all starts with what's the temperature in the peak bar. From now on, when you write pressures down, again, you have to write. You have to take this information on every quality goods, whether it's a maintenance, whether it's a no-cool, you take advantage of every opportunity you have to put your data and show that you enter data. So if we're gonna go 75 PSIG for R22, when you see 75 PSIG, look down in the green bar, where are we? About 40 degrees. When you say 75 PSIG, and that puts slash. So look at that reading. All I did was I wrote the PSIG and the corresponding temperature next to it. That indicates to anyone reading this that I'm not just looking for gauge pressure. I'm anticipating I do need this temperature R. I need temperature because so I can calculate the superheating subcool. We're not going to get into superheating subcool until we understand the very purpose of the gauge is to give us the first number we need. The corresponding temperature of the evaporator coil to where the pressures are. Temperatures and pressures are connected. It used to be for R22, if you got to 75, you were cooling. This is the best this machine could cool, meaning I typically never see one over 80. I've only tried one up to 80 maybe once, and it was again choosing superheat. When I say we have to predict what our repairs will not have an impact, if I'm here on a maintenance or no cool, or someone saying, hey, it's just not cooling, can you check it out? If they say, hey, it's not cooling that well, can you check it out? And I find my refrigerant gauge pressure is about 140, chances are I'm somewhere in my sweet spot or I'm right next to it. At any point, if I'm already here, I can't tell her, hey, I'm gonna add some gas to get some performance for you because you're pretty much there. Now, if you get there and you're low on range, 104, and you know, she said right out, hey, I just moved in 2 months ago, I don't know anything about it. What are the chances if you increase the gas to 125, your performance will increase? Good chance. What are the chances once you get to 125, you start looking for superheat, you can find it somewhere in here? Good chance. My point is, before you offer, if you find a refrigerant in the low end, you know that adding refrigerant will improve the performance. If you get there and you're pretty much, you can't go much more. You know, you're 149, 148, there's no more room for performance improvement, not with gauge pressure, not with superheat. Maybe with something else, maybe with duct modifications. She's got a horrible, nasty filter in there, the coil's dirty. But as far as refrigerant, I'm there. Meaning, when you get to a job and your refrigerant pressure is in the bottom range, now you can say, when I add, I will increase performance. And when we get to superheat, you'll see how we use our temperature probe to monitor in real time the performance increase that we can take a picture of. We can take a digital picture of the performance increase when we find a superheat. What we have to remember is that with R22, now we have the blends, refrigerant blends and replacements. For R22, it's what we have in the lab right now. 407C. 407C is a replacement that we put in machines that have R22. 407C really started hitting the market about maybe 8-9 years ago. And I know because it was 2 years before I got my license, so it would have been 2015. And I was working for an AC company and they were starting to use it. And for the longest time, I didn't like it. I didn't trust it. So what did I do with it? I was told that in the beginning, when you wanted to switch to 407C, you would have to take all of your R22 out. You had to replace a metering device. It wasn't just plug and play. There was a lot of work to use 407C instead. The trade-off is 407C. I think I just bought a jug of it and it costs $96. And it works for R22. Real R22, 700 to 900 per jug, 25 pounds. It's quite the price difference. That's why we developed the 407C. But now with 407C, the properties are somewhat similar, where now you might see yourself in a higher range. Just slightly higher than what normal operating pressures are. So we have to keep in mind that we will come up against replacement refrigerants. Now we understand why systems get low, why they freeze up, why they have the limitations and thresholds. The next thing we have to do, and the final thing here, is we have to find out if a system truly is low on refrigerant. Misdiagnosed low refrigerant is a very common diagnosis where they completely miss and they don't realize it until after they've overcharged the system. And now they have to dump 3-4 pounds right there. Hopefully not in front of the homeowner, but who knows? There are 3 things that can cause a system to freeze up. And those are lack of airflow, lack of refrigerant, or a restriction in the refrigeration cycle. So a restriction in the reefer cycle. And if you must know, when you buy copper tubing, it is initial to reefer for refrigeration. So lack of airflow, lack of refrigerant, or restriction in the refrigeration cycle are the only 3 things that can cause a system to reduce ice and freeze up. We talk about airflow, of course. The new heated filters that are being installed, taking 60% of airflow away from indoor coils. When air can't move across that coil, too much cold is left in the coil. The refrigerant's been in there too long and not enough heat has been removed from the passing air because there's less passing air. This induces evaporative coils to start to freeze up. They need the warm air from the house. They need that warm air to reduce to shed and absorb the heat. So when we have lack of airflow, this can be anything from a dirty impacted coil. It could be an impacted pleated filter or a home that's had no filter for months, and now the evaporated coil is a carpet. That will cause icing, lack of refrigerant. There's no need to explain that anymore. Now you understand it's not just because it's magically out of refrigerant. No, we crossed the thresholds where our corresponding temperature in the evaporated coil is below 32 at 100 and below 32 when we're at 50. We're going to close this out, guys, right now. 10 more minutes. I told you when we use our low side. And now I'm going to tell you when we need to use our high side. We need to use our high side for superheat and subcool. We want to check subcool. We also need to use our high side if we want to see if we truly have a system that's low on refrigerant. Because if we truly have a system that's low on refrigerant, our high side will confirm that, or our high side will tell us, you're wrong. It's not low. The refrigerant you're missing, I have it. Because there's a restriction in my refrigeration cycle. Only with your high side attached can you catch that. Many technicians never use the high side. How will they ever catch a restriction? They won't. This is how we tell. If we look back at yesterday's notes, where we have the typical operating pressures, we remember that we had following my needles. We're going to run 410A. Typical running pressure is 125 over typically 300. Okay. Now, if you can look up in the screen, look up at the TV, would you say that my needles are incongruent? Are my needles somewhat agreeing with each other? Are they somewhat pointed the same way? Yeah. Correct. Because the system is operating with no restrictions in it. Notice now that when I'm at range, again, these are to scale. Everything you see is to scale on your gauge. I didn't draw it this way because they look better. This is how they are. So let's notice what happens when we are 125 over 300 and we're congruent needles. What happens when we equalize? Someone give me an equalized typical pressure for 14A.
221 to 234.
Thank you, sir. 221, 234. Are my needles congruent at all?
No.
No, but are they equalized?
Yeah.
Yes. Is my compressor up?
Yeah.
Is this how equalized needles should look?
Yeah.
Yes. And also, again, the numbers. In the case of equalized, look at gauge pressure. How close are they? These are equalized pressures. They're way closer than 125 over 300. Meaning that when these turn on, these are what your needles do. This needle rises, this needle drops. And they simmer out and meet right about there. Do you understand? When the system is truly low on refrigerant, your high side needle will be congruent. If your high side needle is not congruent, you are not low on refrigerant. Either your evaporator has ice on it or you are in a restricted state. If you don't have your high side connected and you walk up and you're sitting at 90 on 410A after your warm up, you are by all thinking, hey, I am low on refrigerant. But for some reason, when I try to add refrigerant, this moves up for a second and it looks like it takes it, but then it doesn't. Why? I keep trying to put gas in it, but it's low, but it won't take it. It's not low, it's restricted. But if you do not have your high side connected, you will not have the verification of congruency in the high side needle to tell you truly are low. Because this is what true low pressures look like. If I'm 125 over 300 and I'm over here at 80, the congruency must come down as well. Somewhat congruent. However, if I am restricted, I will be at 89 and how my high side will now be at 395. Is there congruency in my needles at all now? One's pointed this way, one's pointed that way. There's no congruency. It's the opposite of congruency. My needles are going opposite directions. This is a restriction. You cannot confirm this with just a low side gauge. What's going to happen is you're going to add gas and add gas and add gas, and it's going to keep going down because the refrigerant you're adding may register. But as the restriction, as it gets stopped, it starts to register only in the high side. This is a restriction. You will have this congruency with your needles when you're truly restricted, or if there's ice on the evaporator coil. Systems freeze up. Before you start, you have got to make sure that evaporator coil has no ice on it. Zero ice, because an iced up coil will do the same as it would be as if it had no evaporator motor. When you do not have an evaporator motor, it goes out, you freeze up. Almost instantly, it starts to freeze up. And when it freezes up, you start dropping to about 75. And if you're freezing up, you're going to start rising on your high side. Because you're frozen. You're frozen up. The coil is frozen up. And you want to know the awesome part? Do you want to know how your coil is finally not frozen anymore? Because if you turn off the system right now, because the frozen coil, what's going to happen to my pressures? They're slowly going to go back, but slowly. This is going to drop down. Because this machine will not become proper equalized pressures, 200 over 200, until the ice is thawed. You will only achieve equalized pressures of 200 over 212 when there's no ice on the coil. When you turn off your system and you're still metering, you're not going back to equalize. This is an indicator you have ice on the evaporator coil. That lack of airflow restriction, because there's ice, will bring your low side down. And if you don't have a high side to give you the verification of congruency or not congruency, you're gonna miss, and you're gonna drop about 6 pounds of refrigerant in this. And then all of a sudden, again, if you had a high side, as you're dropping your 6 pounds, you peek over and you'd be seeing this happening. But you don't have your high side connected. So once we hit 600, this is still stuck at 100. Now, the machine will get very, very loud. The condenser will start to grow. And the only way you can stop it is by releasing refrigerant, venting it. And not just venting it on the low side, 3 minutes, venting it through the high side. Keep in mind, gentlemen, when you're adding refrigerant, yes, we add refrigerant via the low side. However, when I am in a case, when I am slamming over, imagine your needle here slamming over, slamming over, slamming over, and shutting the machine off. You either have to shut the machine off and recover your refrigerant, or now you have to vent, but not from the low side anymore. You have to vent from the high side. So you have to close this, hook up your high side, it's hooked up, and now you have to take off your hose and then open, instead of opening this one, you open this one, and what you would see come out is like the Thriller video, all that mist refrigerant, and you'll have to release it. And what'll happen is when you're in that case, when you're 500, as you're releasing, the number will fall. As you're releasing, it will fall again. And once you finally clear it, then it'll get about 425, and then it'll slide back to its normal position. But because you didn't have this to tell you, you had no idea that you were frozen up or in a truly restricted position. Again, this is why the high side is important. The very congruency of your needles will tell you so much. If we're low, if we truly are low, my needles will be low. If I truly am overcharged, both of my needles will show overcharged. They'll both be in somewhat of congruency until they get so overcharged it slams itself shut. See? Again, if you find low refrigerant, you need access to your high side. I need the congruency of this needle to confirm or deny. Confirm we truly are low and we're not restricted. Or tell me I am wrong and I'm about to waste refrigerant and make a fool out of myself because I am not paying attention to congruency of needles. This is the method, gentlemen. Whatever you thought you were going to do with your life, it's this. It's congruency of needles. Thank you for helping me share that with you, because this is yours now. It never goes away. Nobody can take it from you. You give it to those who only deserve it. Any questions on congruency of needles? and finding a truly low charge, a system that's truly low on charge. Are we good? Any questions, guys? Remember, you can always text me, call me, write it in the discussion board. And again, let's look at our discussion board again as soon as possible today, because I responded. And I responded knowing that you guys would get to respond after today's lecture on what we learned about nitrogen or dye. No in between. Unless the company makes you do it. If that's the case, they're going to hand you a BPP. And you'll do that. And when you get sent back over and over again, maybe it'll start posting. Never know. Guys, thank you so much for Zoom. Y'all have a wonderful night.